My mother-in-law, accidentally, invited my husband's ex to his birthday party, but what happened next left everyone speechless. I spent weeks planning the perfect birthday party for my husband, determined to make it a night he'd never forget. Every detail was carefully thought out, and I wanted everything to be just right. But just as the celebration was about to begin, I overheard a guest mention an unexpected name, his ex. My heart sank. Confused and unsettled, I soon discovered the shocking truth. My mother-in-law had accidentally invited the one person who could turn the evening into a complete disaster. But was it really a mistake, or was this just another one of her schemes? As tensions rose and an unexpected revelation shook the entire room, the night took a turn no one saw coming. What should have been a joyful celebration quickly became something else entirely, something that left everyone speechless. I had spent weeks planning the perfect birthday party for my husband, pouring my heart into every detail. The decorations, the food, the guest list, I wanted everything to be flawless. This was more than just a celebration. It was a way to show him how much I loved and appreciated him. My husband worked hard, always putting others first, and this was my chance to give him a night where he didn't have to worry about anything. But if there was one person determined to make things difficult for me, it was my mother-in-law. From the moment I mentioned the party, she insisted on being involved. "Oh, honey, you can't possibly handle everything on your own," she had said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let me take care of the guest list. You wouldn't want to forget anyone important." I should have known better. I should have politely declined and handled everything myself. But against my better judgment, I let her have some control. After all, what harm could it do? I had already listed out all the important guests. Our closest friends, family members who actually cared about us, and a few of his coworkers. I figured she would just add a few distant relatives or family friends I didn't know well. But on the day of the party, I realized just how big of a mistake I had made. Everything had been set up beautifully. The venue was filled with soft golden lights, the tables were perfectly arranged, and the food smelled absolutely divine. The guests started arriving one by one, filling the space with laughter and conversation. Everything was going according to plan. Until I heard someone mention her name. I had been adjusting the cake table when I overheard two guests whispering nearby. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but then my heart nearly stopped. "I didn't know she was coming," one woman murmured. "Yeah, imagine how awkward it's going to be," the other whispered back. "I mean, his ex at his birthday party? What was she thinking?" My stomach twisted. Surely, they couldn't be talking about her. I spun around, my pulse racing. "Who are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They hesitated, glancing at each other. "Oh, his ex," one of them finally admitted. "We saw her name on the guest list." For a second, I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. This had to be some kind of mistake. There was no way my husband's ex, the woman he had dated for years before we got together, had been invited to his birthday party. Unless... I took a deep breath and walked straight to my mother-in-law, who was standing near the entrance, chatting away like she had no idea what she had just done. "Did you invite her?" My voice was low, but the sharpness in my tone made her raise an eyebrow. She blinked, then tilted her head as if she was shocked by my question. "Who, dear?" "You know exactly who." I folded my arms, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then, right on cue, she let out an exaggerated gasp. "Oh dear, did I? It must have been a complete accident." She placed a hand on her chest like she was oh so sorry. "I was going through the guest list and must have mixed up names. You know how these things happen." Liar. This wasn't an accident. This was exactly the kind of thing she would do, act sweet and innocent while stirring up as much drama as possible. I felt my jaw clench. My mother-in-law had never fully accepted me. She had smiled at me in front of my husband, but made snide comments when we were alone. She had always found ways to remind me that I wasn't her first choice for her son. And now, she had done this. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her out in front of everyone. But instead, I forced a smile. "I see," I said coolly. Because the truth was, I didn't see, not yet. I had no idea what her real goal was. Did she just want to humiliate me? Was she hoping to make my husband reminisce about his past? And worst of all, I had no idea how my husband would react. I swallowed hard, scanning the room. He wasn't here yet. He was on his way, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I had two choices. I could make a scene now and try to stop whatever was coming, or I could wait, play it cool, and see how things unfolded. And so, I made my choice. I would stay calm. I would watch. And I would be ready. Because something told me this night was far from over. I stood near the entrance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My husband was only minutes away, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every time I glanced at my mother-in-law, she wore that smug little smile, like she was enjoying some private joke at my expense. And then, just as I was bracing myself, I heard the front door open. Laughter and chatter died down as my husband stepped inside, completely unaware of the storm waiting for him. He looked handsome, as always, his dark hair slightly tousled, his warm smile spreading as he took in the decorations. My heart clenched. I had done all of this for him. I had wanted tonight to be perfect. And then she stepped forward. I barely had time to process it before it was happening, his ex, moving toward him with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. Her dress was elegant, her makeup flawless, and she carried herself like she belonged. The room seemed to hold its breath as she walked right up to my husband. "Happy birthday, love." I felt like I had been slapped. My husband froze. His entire body went stiff, his smile vanishing in an instant. His face drained of color as he blinked at her, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I looked at my mother-in-law. She was grinning. Whispers rippled through the crowd. People were already exchanging looks, leaning into each other, murmuring. I felt like a spectator in my own nightmare, watching everything unfold in slow motion. And then, my husband did something that made my stomach flip. He exhaled, a slow, measured breath, and then, instead of looking awkward or flustered, he straightened. His voice was calm, controlled. "I'm surprised to see you here. It's been a long time." The room fell into complete silence. His ex smirked, tilting her head slightly. "Yes, it has." I felt sick. And then, she reached into her small purse and pulled out a tiny envelope. "Well," she said, her voice light, "I'm just here to return something that belongs to you." I stared at the envelope in her hand. It was small, plain white. But the way my husband was looking at it, his eyes wide, his body tense, made my skin crawl. Slowly, hesitantly, he took it. His fingers trembled slightly as he slid it open. And then, the moment he saw what was inside, his face changed completely. His eyes darted back to her, pure shock written all over his features. "Where did you get this?" His voice was sharp, almost urgent. His ex just smiled. "Where do you think?" And that's when I saw it, my mother-in-law, suddenly shifting uncomfortably. Her smug confidence was starting to crack. My husband's jaw tightened. He looked from his ex to his mother. "Did you know about this?" My mother-in-law let out a nervous laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, this is your party. Let's not get into old, answer me." The authority in his voice made even me tense up. His mother's smile faltered. His ex folded her arms, watching the exchange with something that looked like satisfaction. "You should really read what's inside," she said, nodding toward the paper in his hands. With a deep breath, my husband unfolded it completely. His eyes scanned the words quickly, too quickly, like he couldn't believe what he was reading. His breathing grew shallow. And then, as if the air had been knocked out of him, he whispered, "No. This can't be right." The entire room was watching now. People weren't even pretending to hold conversations anymore. I clenched my fists. "What does it say?" My voice came out steady, but inside, I was anything but. For a long moment, my husband didn't respond. He just stood there, gripping the letter like it was burning his skin. And then, finally, he lifted his gaze, his expression a mix of fury, pain, and disbelief. "It's from her." His voice was barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard. "Her? His ex nodded. From me. From the past. My husband turned back to her. Why are you giving me this now? After all this time? She gave a small shrug, her expression unreadable. Because you deserved to know the truth. And then she turned to my mother-in-law, and her next words sent a chill down my spine. Because she made sure you never got it. The entire room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, people turning to each other in confusion. My mother-in-law went pale, but quickly tried to recover. That's ridiculous, she snapped. I have no idea what she's talking about. But my husband wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was staring at the letter, his breathing ragged. You kept this from me? His voice was low, but the betrayal in it was unmistakable. My mother-in-law took a step forward, her voice suddenly desperate. Sweetheart, whatever she's telling you, it's just to hurt you. I was always looking out for you. You know that. His ex scoffed. Looking out for him? She turned to my husband. She made sure you and I never had a chance. She lied to both of us. My head was spinning. My mother-in-law, who had always been cold toward me, always made me feel like I wasn't good enough, was now the center of something much bigger, something far worse than I had ever imagined. And judging by my husband's expression, this wasn't something he could just brush off. He clenched the letter in his fist, his jaw tight. I need to know everything. My mother-in-law took a shaky breath, her carefully built mask slipping. I was just trying to do what was best, everything. My husband's voice was like steel. And I knew at that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. But one thing was certain, my mother-in-law had planned this night thinking she was in control. She had no idea just how fast everything was unraveling. Silence filled the room as my husband stood frozen, gripping the letter like it held the weight of his entire past. His eyes darted over the words again and again, his expression unreadable. Whatever was written there, it had shaken him to his core. His ex watched him carefully, her lips curling into a knowing smile. I thought you should know the real reason why I left back then. My breath caught. Slowly, my husband lifted his gaze. What do you mean? She folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. You always thought I walked away from our relationship because I lost interest. That I just gave up on us. She let out a bitter laugh. But the truth is, I never wanted to leave you. My mother-in-law shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting together. My husband swallowed hard. Then why did you? His ex gestured toward the letter. Because your mother made sure we never had a future. Gasps rippled through the guests. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My husband clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the paper. What did she do? His voice was low, dangerously calm. His ex exhaled. She told me you had moved on. That you wanted nothing to do with me. She made it crystal clear that if I tried to come back, I would only humiliate myself. She shook her head. And she told you the same thing, didn't she? My husband turned to his mother, his expression dark. Tell me she's lying. My mother-in-law opened her mouth, but no words came out. The confident, smug woman who had been so sure of herself minutes ago was now scrambling, caught in her own trap. I was just trying to help, she stammered. She wasn't right for you, sweetheart. You were so young, and she would have held you back. You ruined my life. My husband cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. You destroyed something that wasn't yours to destroy. She shook her head frantically. I was looking out for you. I knew you deserved better, and I was right because her eyes flicked to me, and that's when I understood. This had never just been about his ex. This was about me. She had interfered back then just like she had interfered tonight, because she had always believed she had the right to decide who was worthy of her son. But she had miscalculated. Because this time, my husband wasn't just some heartbroken young man. He was a grown man, a husband, and he had no patience left for his mother's games. Still holding the letter in one hand, he reached for me with the other. His fingers wrapped around mine, firm and unwavering. He looked straight at his mother, his voice calm but ice-cold. The only mistake you've made, Mom, is underestimating the woman I love. The room fell deathly silent. My mother-in-law's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for a way to fight back. But there was nothing left to say. She had lost. With a final, frustrated huff, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the party, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. A few guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what to do next. But I knew exactly what to do. I turned to my husband and squeezed his hand. He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw everything in his eyes: anger, betrayal, but most of all, love. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I am now." The tension in the room broke as a few guests awkwardly clapped, and then more followed. The party wasn't ruined. It had just taken a dramatic detour. But in the end, it had given us something far more important than a birthday celebration. It had given us clarity. My mother-in-law had tried to manipulate the night into another one of her victories, but instead, she had exposed herself. She had shown my husband the lengths she would go to in order to control his life. And now, finally, he saw the truth. As for me, I smiled. Because no matter what my mother-in-law had intended, the night had ended with my husband choosing me.